Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidas, bienvenidos a este EFE Forum Energía que lleva por nombre Reforma del Mercado Eléctrico Europeo, un paso adelante hacia una Europa más comunitaria. El acto, organizado por la agencia EFE y por PGE, tendrá una duración aproximada de 1 hora y pretende arrojar luz acerca de un tema que está tan de moda en estas últimas semanas. Aprovecho estos primeros minutos para agradecer brevemente el trabajo de todos los compañeros que están haciendo posible y han hecho posible este evento, y también al Instituto Cervantes por acogernos en esta sede. Desde luego, un auténtico placer para todos los amantes de la cultura. Y antes de comenzar, dos cosas. La primera de ellas es que, bueno, ya veo a alguno con el dispositivo, pero este programa dispone de un servicio de traducción simultánea, por lo tanto, si necesitan, pues pueden dirigirse a uno de nuestros azafatos, que ellos se lo proporcionarán. Y la segunda, agradecer, como no, a todos los presentes y también a la gente que nos está siguiendo en este foro a través de Internet, de nuestro streaming, en los canales tanto en español como en inglés. Y sin más, comenzamos ya con la primera de las intervenciones.
Let's go with the first opening session by the Subsecretary for Ecological Transformation from the Ministry, Miguel González Suela. Please, sir.
Buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to start by thanking EFE for the information, as well as Polska Grupa. It is a true pleasure for me to be here, particularly because of the topic we will be dealing with. If there's one thing we're interested in, is creating spaces for thought and debate, where we can deal with the subjects that will transform our economy model. And without these transcendental debates, it would be difficult to undertake this oncoming reform of the electric generation market. And it is a pleasure to do it here in the Cervantes Institute. I devoted 10 years of my career to promoting the use of Spanish language, which makes me a fan of this institution. But I'm also a fan of sharing this space with the Minister of Climate and Environment from Poland, Adam Guibourgé-Czetwertyński. I cannot see him on screen, but
and to organize your visit, because of course we are going to strengthen our ties. And I hope that in a period as brief as possible, we can meet here and we can, of course, visit different places and organize different public policies. Y continúo en español. Bien, como decía, nos interesan los espacios de debate, nos interesan los
to Spanish. We're interested in spaces for thought, for thinking, and debating, particularly for this priority topic in the European energy policy. One fundamental aspect out of 4 of the Spanish presidency. We have gone through a deep crisis in the past years, and we have stabilized prices, and we can be proud of that, thanks to coordinated action from all European countries. We cannot rest on our laurels, though. We clearly understand that we need to press on with structural reforms and new standards and reduce our exaggerated dependence from third countries to produce electricity in our countries. I believe we have learned much during this energy crisis. First of all, we cannot slack down in the deployment of renewable energies, reduce fossil fuels, and remove technological and raw material dependence. At the same time, we have put together a regulation that did make sense in a context in the past, and today turns out to be insufficient or obsolete, and keeps us from providing a quick response to the events in the power market. Thanks to the Iberian solutions, Spain actually managed to prevent gas prices to catch on to the power market. And thanks to this, inflation was relatively contained if compared to other Euro countries. The reality, however, is that facing these energy stress situations, our response shouldn't always be provisional or highly specific or based on circumstances. We are aware that we need to act in the face of the lack of coordination. We need to reform the power market both in width and depth. And this is because we need to provide response to stress or volatility. We need to guarantee affordable prices for our consumers and prices that will attract investment in a renewable energy deployment environment. I must insist, this market was designed over 20 years ago, and it did play a role back then, but it does not fully adapt to today's reality, where we have an unexpected deployment of renewable energies. Suffice to look at the Spanish reality. Right now, our installed capacity for renewables is nearly 60%, 60. This is changing paradigm. 50% of the electric energy produced this year comes from renewable energies. And we have accelerated the development of all sources. Wind energy has grown by 30%, and photovoltaic has grown by 300%. And the deployment continues, and it is unstoppable. In 7 years from now, we expect that 50% to become 74%. This means a new scenario is required, an updated, modern scenario allowing, on one side, resilience and protection of consumers, as well as competitiveness. So, a resilient system to face stress situations like the one we just went through, and allowing to protect consumers immediately and sustainably in times of crisis, providing special attention to vulnerable clients, and to guarantee the survival of our industry in a geopolitically tense outlook. But beyond a stress-proof system, we need to take one step further. We need to be future-proof. We're talking about supply security, investment stability, and price stability. We need to give investors certainty for them to invest in renewables throughout the whole life cycle. And we need to highlight the benefits of a renewable energy mix for all consumers to provide stable, affordable prices. And we also need to foster the entrance of key aspects like energy storage, demand management, and further possibilities to give the system greater stability. The EU picked up the challenge, and under the Swedish presidency, the reform of the electric market was launched. This week, we have a meeting of energy ministers, but there is also a proposal out there since March. The search for consensus and coordinated actions is vital to us, and we do believe that we need joint action, and long-term and capacity contracts need to be reinforced, and short-term markets that have worked appropriately need to be maintained. So we understand that the future renewable model we're headed for must provide flexibility mechanisms for our electric system, such as, once more, storage. And for this purpose, we need to work in capacity markets, and we need legal tools to face crisis and feel protected. In some, we need a new framework to guarantee consumer protection and to spread out the benefits of highly decarbonized energy mixes, favoring the competitiveness of our industry without having to rely on each state's financial muscle. And that's what we aim to do during our presidency. It is one of the 4 lines of action. As you know, this second half of the year, we need to update our integrated plans for energy and climate. We will work on strategic independence, the Net Zero Industry Act. Certainly, we will work on decarbonizing our economy and finding new energy vectors. And we will continue to work and reinforce this reform of the electric market to make the system more resilient and secure, because these actions will allow us to strengthen our economy while fostering green industry and employment. Stable and affordable prices for energy are the best recipe to consolidate the industrial and entrepreneurial fabric of our union and to attract new investment. This endeavor is highly Europeistic. It involves joint action and progress in the electric market. We're 2 weeks from the onset of the Spanish presidency, so let's walk together in this endeavor. Thank you. Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary. I would like to thank the Ministry for their efforts to have you attend this meeting. Thank you very much. Now, without further ado, we will hear Mr. Adam Guibourgé-Czetwertyński, Deputy Minister for Climate and Environment from Poland. Please go ahead.
And thanks for having me. Although it's only online, I very much regret that I could not join you personally. I actually inherited only last week new responsibilities in the ministry for the energy department. So I have a few commitments in the parliament as we are processing an important law for our energy market. But allow me to share a few thoughts at the beginning. I think we are clearly, all of us in Europe, moving towards the same goal. Also, although we may have a bit different strategies and a bit different national circumstances, I mean, some of us may have a bit more solar potential, some have hydro potential, some will build nuclear energy, some will not. So that will obviously affect the way we implement the strategy, but ultimately we all tend to the same objective. We want to be able to produce our electricity in a way that is zero emission, that ensures the competitiveness of our economies, and provide stable, affordable electricity to our citizens. And I think that the last year and the very good cooperation we had at European level, reacting to the crisis and being able to actually react quite quickly on some topics is for me a very good and very encouraging for the future and for our chances to find good solutions to enable all of us to move together towards these common goals. And I think there is a couple of lessons I took from this experience that are useful also in the discussions we are now having on the reform of the electricity market. I think the first thing that is clear to me is that capacity mechanisms are key, and they will remain a key feature of our electricity market in the long run. We need to have, obviously, flexibility at member states level to adapt them to the national circumstances. And certainly in the Polish case, we also see the need to have a sort of a safety mechanism for capacity markets in case we are not able to build our new zero emission power sources as fast as we are planning. If there is any delay for any reason, that we could have a safety net and may be able to organize additional auctions under the existing capacity mechanisms to allow for a stable functioning of the energy system in Poland. A second element I take from our experience in the last year is that it's important that we have the appropriate tools to protect consumers. And when I mean consumers, I don't mean only households, but also SMEs. We've seen with the crisis that it's unrealistic to expect small companies like bakeries or others to be able to hedge themselves against fluctuating energy prices. So we need to have instruments to allow us to protect these consumers from fluctuating energy prices. A third comment I wanted to make was around some of the ideas that were tabled by the Commission in its proposals, like regional virtual hubs or shortening the gate closure times, compensation for offshore generations. I think I am a bit prudent with most of these ideas for at least two reasons. One is some of these ideas I don't think are mature enough and ready to be implemented, and some of them are actually potentially even dangerous in a sense that they would lead to an unjustified socialization of some of the cost involved with implementing those ideas. The final comment may be on the proposals around the REMIT regulation, where I think there is certainly potential to improve the transparency of the market and the integrity of the market. I think some of the measures there are very much welcome. What remains a bit of a challenge probably is to find the right balance between national competences and Acer competences, and I think that's certainly the last thing we will still have to work on. But generally, we've been doing, I think, a great job under the Swedish presidency. Looking forward for the discussion at the council next week. Hopefully, we can find an agreement in the council that would allow us then, under the Spanish presidency, to conduct those trilogues and to agree on a final shape of that regulation with the European Parliament and the Commission during the trilogues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Guibert. Y bueno, pues tras la intervención del viceministro polaco de Clima y Medio Ambiente, damos por inaugurada este fórum.
We consider this EFE Forum open. Next, we have a very high-level round table. So could speakers come up on stage and take their seats?
Como decíamos, en esta mesa redonda, lo que vamos a tratar es...
As announced, this is a round table. Mr. Riera, please take your seat. And you, please, sit over there. Thank you. So, as we were saying, well, these things, seating problems are a matter of live events. So here's a round table to shed some light on the future electric market reform. For this purpose, we have a consultant or advisor for the Cabinet of the Secretary of State for Energy, the Director of Technology and Innovation from OMIE, Mr. Pedro Basagoiti, and we also welcome the Deputy President of Regulatory Affairs at PGE, Wanda Book, and last but not least, the Director of NERA Economic Consulting in Spain, Oscar Arnedillo. Hello. So here is a question for all of you. Understanding the reform of the European electricity market requires talking about the global energy crisis, which has revealed some weaknesses in the current system. It also has put on the table the need to have common tools to respond in a homogeneous way in case of future shocks to react together. So considering this oncoming reform, what tools do you believe member states should have to anticipate a similar crisis? Let's start with you, Mr. Riera. Please, short answers, no more than 2 minutes. I know it's a complicated subject, but please make an effort. Okay, so I'll get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I'll try to make it quick, but before we start thinking about the tools to face the next price crisis, we should weigh what happened in the past 2 years. And the first obvious conclusion is that the Union was not ready to face such a vast crisis. There were no legal instruments agreed to face a crisis like this, so each country did what they could to relieve the economic and social impact of those prices, and that led to a vast array of measures implemented differently in each country. We had revenue caps, clawback mechanisms, taxes to extraordinary profit, subsidies to power fees, VAT reductions. In Spain and Portugal, we had the Iberian mechanism. So it's, as I said, a vast array of different measures. And the silver lining of those improvised measures is that, to a greater or lesser extent, they dealt with the urgent issue at hand, which was palliating the effects of the crisis. But it did generate a cost, mostly regulation uncertainty. We must accept that in finding all these solutions, we created regulatory uncertainty, and both consumers and regulators alike do not know what to expect in terms of prices. You don't know if you're an investor, if you're having a tax imposed or a revenue cap. So we need to gain consumers and investors' trust. And I believe there's only one way to do that, which is finding solutions that will allow all member states to face the next crisis, if it should happen, with credible, believable solutions. And this is where I fear the Commission's proposal is not headed in the right direction. Apparently, the next crisis, according to the Commission, will be an each-man-for-himself situation where each state should deal with the crisis with their own tax resources. And that might work for a number of countries in the Union that have enough tax space to deal with that. But for most countries in the EU, that's not a sustainable solution. And if it's not sustainable, it's not believable. And in the face of a new price crisis, countries will call for other measures, like revenue caps and clawback clauses, so we will go back to autumn last year. So to prevent this vicious circle and this uncertainty, we need to find a truly believable and acceptable, sustainable solution for all member states. Just to put ideas on the table, if instead of depending on the national funds, these subsidies came from a European fund, the idea would be more believable than the Commission's idea that sends investors a message that subsidies will be applied, but is ultimately hard to believe, and it generates more uncertainty. Mr. Basagoiti, what's your answer to the same question? Well, thank you very much for the invitation and for this opportunity. I will focus on the reasons for the crisis. Actually, the crisis happened because Europe, particularly some countries within Europe, have a shaky organization of their electric system. It is evident now. We realize that there's little diversification of sources, not only in terms of raw materials to generate electricity, but also at the level of vendor lock, a single supplier. Well, before waging war against Ukraine, Russia started restricting their gas supply, and we discovered that without that gas supply, there could have been blackouts, well, in some countries, not in Spain, but certainly in other countries, and this led to a price increase in gas that bounced back to the electricity market. So whatever measures are adopted need to be adopted at a European level. And if subsidies are on the horizon, they should be European as well. But the important lesson for Europe to learn from this is diversification. We cannot millions of Europeans cannot rely on a single product or on a single vendor or supplier. We need to find new products, new alternatives, so that the likelihood of a future crisis is minimized or reduced or eliminated. I don't know how important this is in the debate, but I believe it's a relevant aspect of it.
Oh, that's my turn, right? Okay, so going back what you said, Mr. Director, about the solution that will prevent the market to be more fragmented than we want it to be, we have to also remember that there is no one solution that fits all of us. I mean, we are, the fact that we are so different is we can confirm also analyzing the Iberian mechanism that you have here in Spain. That would never work in Poland. Why is that? Because the energy generation from natural gas in Poland is around 6%. So it almost never reached the threshold of 10% when it comes to daily generation. So we need to take care of the flexibility of the legislation that will be able to provide, to address the potential crisis in the future, but we cannot, building case by case, obviously. So actually, when it comes, what also you said, of course, the main source of the crisis that we faced last 2 years almost is because we were vendor lock with Russia, obviously, and with our gas supplier. But not many people are aware of the fact of how much Poland during recent years sped up with the energy transition. We don't have pretty good opinion in the European Union when it comes to our energy mix, but actually the pace of the green transition in Poland during recent years it's amazing. Actually, in only 2020 we had less than 2 gigawatts of installed capacity in solar. And this year we reached 13 gigawatts. So only last year, 5 additional gigawatts in solar. So that's super impressive. But as a result of this, impressive pace and of the green transition, we will also face in mid-30s probably the challenges with dispatchable power in our system, and we need to provide dispatchable power to the system. We all know that this is kind of a necessity. My company only gonna provide offshore wind farms. I mean, we're gonna deliver 3 gigawatts within this decade to our system, additional 3 gigawatts to employ with photovoltaics and onshore wind, and only only up to 2030. It's huge investment challenge, and also we are at this moment we are in our give and take process, negotiation process with Koreans to deliver nuclear. It's not the only project that that's gonna be carried out in Poland when it comes to nuclear. But until it happens, we need to provide reliability to the system to provide the energy to our customers. And I think that this is exactly what, there are solutions on the table. Mr. Adam Guibourgé-Czetwertyński mentioned them. We do support them because, as I said, without, we have to remain flexible when it comes to legislation, to not get into another crisis, but the crisis that will not emerge because of the external situation, but because of the legislation that we had implemented.
Thank you very much. Señor Arnedillo.
Yo creo que lo primero que tenemos que hacer es estar de acuerdo en cuáles son los problemas que se han identificado durante la crisis. Y puede parecer una pregunta estúpida, puesto que dices el precio del mercado ha alcanzado niveles que históricamente no se
in
habían
a
visto.
situation where market prices are reaching historical highs, it's very difficult. But these rising prices are not a symptom of a market failure or weakness that needs to be corrected. It merely reveals the lack of supply, the scarcity of gas, and the costs of generating and producing that electricity. So we don't have to intervene the market thinking that the problem will be corrected. It could actually cause more problems, because if market prices go up, if we know that market prices are volatile, consumers will have an incentive to sign long-term contracts and invest in energy efficiency. And with that, we make the market more robust and resilient in the future. If we intervene in market functioning by limiting prices and capping profits and applying extraordinary benefits, I call them extraordinary because during the COVID crisis and prices went down, nobody considered intervening to help suppliers or producers. In my own perspective, the main weaknesses that was exposed in this crisis was the fact that the EC yielded to pressures from member states to intervene markets, each in their own way, and setting up different market caps. Well, setting a cap of 180 euro in the fixed market is very different from setting a cap of 67. And intervening the market, applying extraordinary benefits, is not the same as subsidizing fossil fuel generation. I do understand that the ministry is concerned with reducing risk, but we need to let the market work and stop being obsessed about price volatility, because consumers that want to sign long-term contracts and fixed prices can do so. We don't need Big Brother to sign contracts for our citizens. And this idea about a European fund, well, we're not against it, but we need some context here. We need to understand this in a concept in which the Iberian exception meant the transfer of 2 billion euros to France, Portugal, and Morocco that Spanish consumers will have to pay back during the next few years. So just let the market work on its own. Consumers who want to sign fixed-price contracts may do so. Let us not interfere with the market. In Spain, for instance, the National Institute for Statistics miscalculated the numbers for inflation, and at the same time, 35 to 40% of our customers were paying a fee or a tariff that was indexed to the spot market. And this is all worsened by the fact that vulnerable consumers are demanded to be or to take these prices to receive the subsidies, which makes no sense at all, because these are vulnerable clients are the ones most exposed to the vulnerability of fluctuations. So let us explain consumers that if they want fixed price contracts, they may do so, and let's allow large users pick the kind of contract they are most comfortable with.
Pues ahora les voy a pedir disculpas a todos
Thank you,
ustedes,
sir.
también
I
a ustedes,
apologize
porque
to
vamos a abrir un
all
pequeño
of you
paréntesis, y es
because
que,
we're
vamos a conectar ahora mismo
opening
con un hombre que ha estado muy de moda en
parenthesis
estos
here.
últimos
We're
días. Estoy
connecting
hablando de Nicolás González
to
Casares, diputado del
Nicolás
Parlamento Europeo por el
González,
PSOE,
deputy
negociador
for the
jefe de la reforma del
PSOE, chief
diseño del
negotiator
mercado
for the
eléctrico de la Unión
reform
Europea y
of the
ponente
electric
de su
market
propuesta,
design,
conocida hace unas semanas.
and
Me
speaker
consta
of
de su
the
voluntad para
proposal.
acompañarnos hoy aquí en
I'm
Madrid,
aware
a todos
that he
nosotros,
wanted to be
pero
here
por
with
cuestiones
us
de
today
agenda
in
se lo
Madrid,
han
but
impedido.
his
Así que no
agenda
le quito
kept
más
him from
tiempo.
doing so.
Adelante, Nicolás.
So without further ado, please go ahead, Nicolás.
Bueno, buenos días. Lo de la moda no sé cómo
Well,
tomarlo.
good morning. I don't know if I'm a hot topic or not. Is that positive or negative? At any rate, thank you for the invitation, and my apologies for not being there with you. There's a plenary session in Strasbourg, and I'll have to go back into the main room and cast my vote. I would like to greet my friend Albert, Pedro Basagoiti, Wanda, and Oscar. We've heard this a number of times. Why did this reform come along? Well, because there was a price crisis mostly motivated or caused by our dependence on Russia's fossil gas. I'm not saying all member countries are highly dependent. Spain would be an exception in this, but certainly Putin is using their gas supply as a geopolitical weapon, and this price-setting system has done nothing but to drive electricity prices up, along with gas prices. And in turn, as Oscar was saying a minute ago, it is true that that direct indexing to spot prices caused energy bills to be quickly contaminated. And Spain was the first to trigger the alarms about this huge distortion based on the gas supply deficit, which exponentially grew when Russia invaded the Ukraine. I remember Teresa Rivera saying in August 21 that Putin was already playing with our markets and interfering with them. Considering the very serious experience many member states have gone through, the EU was required to take measures. Some of them have worked better than others, but mostly we have almost prevented a recession in many countries. Inflation has been controlled and electric supply has been guaranteed. And that's a successful aspect. But all this is based on emergency measures without due debate. And measures have been varied and uneven. And as Acer said, the market was not fully ready to face emergency situations like these. Hence, after we've learned all these lessons and trying to adapt the existing regulation to new challenges, a new climate law, and others, we need to undertake this reform. I believe that the EU has filed a very well-balanced idea or proposition to reduce existing volatility, sending a message to long-term markets and strengthening them with PPAs or CFDs. And I believe this is positive. In my proposal, we tried to go a little step further to improve and reinforce this idea. Certainly, there were some vague points in the EU proposition. First of all, I don't believe that with the existing tools we could have faced a crisis like the one in the past or possible crisis in the future. The tools proposed are based on financial aid when a crisis is declared. I believe that those thresholds need to be more objective in the future. And we cannot leave everything to the financial muscle of one or other member state. It doesn't work the same for all. And this affects even the internal market. And right now, we are also reforming our tax rules. So in trying to reduce state debt excessive spending. Well, not excessive spending, but much required spending to cover demands we didn't have in the past. So in that kind of scenario, we're further reducing member states' financial capacity. So this leads to a problem for us. We lack the instruments and the foresight and the predictability on which rules could be established because the ones proposed today are insufficient. And that's a concern for us because it adds volatility to the market and generates distrust. Certainly, we're proposing a cap on inframarginals, and we're discussing that in the European Parliament. And certainly, we need to streamline. We need more consistency, but we cannot forget that we need predictable tools. I want us to meet our renewables targets. I've also worked on the renewables directive, and reaching that 42.5% renewables by 2030 is relevant. But we need to provide a stable framework, and it has to be crisis-proof. And we also need to give some framework, not just to investors, but also to consumers that will electrify their demand. In Spain, for instance, we need to grow our power demand, not only in households, but also in transportation. We need a greater demand for electricity-driven markets, and that requires some certainty that volatility will not ruin citizens and companies' investments. For that reason, we believe that tools are required. As for PPAs, certainly we want to make PPAs more transparent and increase their availability. About CFDs, well, many of us are discussing where those profits go. Our concern rests more on the potential costs of those CFD contracts. We're also debating about capacity mechanisms. In this case, we propose that this will not be a last resource tool, just a part of the tools available to states, but that is still open for discussion. Still, I would like to link that possibility of capacity markets to the development of renewable sources. In other words, we need to move towards a renewable future with lower foreign dependence, greater strategic autonomy on our own energy sources, but remaining aware that, as the International Energy Agency says, a minimum of 60 to 90% renewables will require some elements of both flexibility and capacity backup. So it's a highly relevant debate coming up in the next few weeks. And last, I would like to mention a few positive elements in this reform, like the right to share energy. But in this first scenario, it has to be slightly modulated to prevent third agents with biased interests from participating, to prevent possible monopolies and trusts in this right to share energy. Second, in the midst of an energy transition towards renewables, we cannot overlook consumers, those consumers who suffer during a crisis, who are vulnerable. There is such thing as energy poverty. In the winter of 21, this poverty affected approximately 8% of European citizens. That means 40 million Europeans who are vulnerable or energy poor. We need to give these citizens the certainty that minimum consumption will always be guaranteed. There will always be a backup for them. Of course, we must also give these vulnerable consumers the tools that will allow them to make more data-based decisions. Certainly, we stand at a relevant crossroad in the Parliament and in the Council. We need to close the Renewables Directive. Already it's still ajar, slightly opened, and we expect to vote in the July committee and the Energy and Industry Committee of the European Parliament, and we believe that we can bring this vote to the plenary by September, for the first September plenary, to start negotiations to wrap it all up by the end of this year. That's our objective. We need to urgently reform the electric market, and that will entail great efforts. My team are showing all the political will required to move ahead in this matter. And without further ado, thank you very much. Thanks, EFE, for inviting me. And thanks, everyone. And thank you, Nicolas, for your patience. We know how frantic it's been in Europe and in Spain, so thank you very much for taking a few minutes of your time. Going back to our panel, Mr. Riera, a few weeks ago, the chair of European operators of the wholesale market for electricity was saying that focusing the debate on marginalism was obsolete and populistic. Do you agree with that? I see you smiling. Do you believe that the price-setting system has been demonized? I believe, well, both yes and no. There has been a little bit of confusion here. I believe short-term markets, like the day-to-day market, which is marginalistic too, have played a role, and they've met their function, their objective, which is giving short-term, sending short-term messages, and that worked well. But the problem arises because perhaps we've asked short-term markets too much. Not only did we ask them to issue the right short-term messages to achieve static efficiency, but we're also demanding that these short-term markets send the right messages to create dynamic efficiency, which rests on long-term decisions like investment decisions. And this is where the problem arises. As electric markets, which are highly specific, particularly an electric market in transition, relying on short-term to send long-term messages generates plenty of problems. Beyond the price crisis, where most of the demand is exposed to short-term markets, we also risk having serious problems coming from price volatility. But not only that, other crises might come up, other types of crises, and if we go along the same path with this indexation to short-term markets, maybe the next crisis will be an investment crisis or a debt crisis in the industry. What I mean is, as more renewables come in and the pool prices crumble, and as we depend on this pool, a time may come when pool prices are not high enough to attract the renewable investments we need to meet our decarbonization objectives. And in that case, we could have an investment crisis. Or it might happen that those merchants who have invested based on pool revenues, if those revenues crumble, a point might come when those revenues are not enough to pay the debt with which they started the investment. So perhaps we are envisaging years of rescuing the companies that invested there. And these problems come from asking short-term markets too much. And the solution to prevent that kind of problem is fostering long-term markets and long-term contracts like PPAs and CFDs. And that's pretty much what the EC is proposing, and we believe it's the right approach. And I believe that all member states find it reasonable, and the Parliament too. So the good news is we've reached almost consensus on this matter. It was a debate 6 months ago, but today everyone agrees, and I believe that's good news. Reforming the design of the EU market is one of the pillars for transition in the continent, a process focused on renewable storage systems and the deployment of green hydrogen to support that electrification of the continent. And as Ms. Book was saying, Poland is making huge progress in decarbonizing their energy mix, which traditionally depended or rested highly on fossil fuels. How has your country reacted to the energy crisis, and how do you intend to face this next winter?
Okay. Sorry, I need to wait because of the translation. Yeah, I already provide you some numbers when it comes to the pace of our transition, and but how we gonna what saved us and what will save us probably during upcoming winter. I hope like not many winters ahead of us with the crisis. But it was a coal and lignite that still plays significant plays significant role when it comes to energy generation in Poland, and that helped us to survive, because what I said, the energy generation from gas is like not playing, like it's not much when it comes to our energy system. But also because of the regulation, the European regulation and EU ETS, the prices skyrocketed, and energy prices skyrocketed. And it's not because of the EU ETS prices only, I mean the allowances, the prices of allowances only, but because of the possibility of the energy companies to hedge for allowances. You know, we are the companies, we have like 4 significant players on the market, 4 energy group on the market, and as I said, we are in a transition process. We invest a lot. Our recurring EBITDA last year was 1.5 billion euros, and this is exactly what we spent on CapEx last year. And also we have OpEx costs and additional costs that we need to. So, you know, we have a vast demands for financing, but our potential to get the financing from the market is slightly limited, because like financial institutions are not willing to give us the money until we have such a significant share of coal in our portfolio. So, you know, we are like navigating through this situation. We are not able to provide significant supply of the energy to the wholesale market, and because of the demand and the like lower supply, the prices skyrocketed. And we couldn't offer more because we couldn't hedge for more EU ETS allowances. So, you know, this is the situation which is completely different in Poland. And well, bearing in mind that we're gonna invest every penny, we don't want like revenue cap to be kept in the legislation, because not as here in Spain, we are when we have like additional savings, let's say, we are not scratching our heads and wondering what to do with those money and whether to pay dividends to our stakeholders, shareholders. We like haven't paid our the dividends to our shareholders for years. We invest every zloty. So, you know, the situation in Poland, as I said, is completely different. We're gonna be saved by the lignite and coal for a little bit more time, actually we need an understanding here. Mr. Director, you said that we don't want to be put into another crisis, and I want to underline again that we cannot allow like member states, European Union, to put us into another crisis, because you know, lack of dispatchable power in the system could be generated because of the legislation. We have to avoid it. And also, you know, one more thing that I want to underpin is, you know, Poland and Spain like differ as much as we only can when it comes to our energy mix, but also we share some similarities. when it comes to challenges. In Poland, several times during last months, we had to cut off our energy generation from renewables because our DSOs and TSOs were not able to, the system was not able to consume all of the generation. This is exactly what happened in Spain as well, so we see that it's not only, that there's not only challenge in Poland here, and we need to address that because not only Poland will face this kind of disruption in the system in the future, but also other countries.
Thank you. Tanto la Comisión Europea como la Comisión de Industria e Investigación
Both the EC and the Industry Committee and the European Parliament state that the future reform should support consumers, particularly the most vulnerable ones. And one of the measures would be assigning the profit of CFDs, and that's generating plenty of amendments. So how do we suggest the final wording that will combine protection to households and protection to investors in energy transition, while at the same time keep the market working appropriately? Here is a question to all of you. So let's start on the right side. Well, that sounds like a twofold question. On one side, how to pay out the profits of CFDs and how to strike a balance between protecting consumers and encouraging investment while keeping the market working. About protecting consumers, I will go back to what I said before. We need believable measures and sustainable investment for all member states, not just for a small group. About energy transition, well, we need to foster or facilitate the deployment of CFDs and PPAs, mostly for renewables, in combination with capacity markets that will incentivize the backup technologies we need to guarantee supply during the transition. And then the correct functioning of markets. Well, that's a very broad question. I would say leave the market alone, leave it to work in the present design with slight improvements that can be discussed. But most of the market design is actually working. And perhaps the pain point in European negotiations, which is paying out the profits of these contracts among stakeholders and consumers, we need to be aware that these contracts pay out dividends, but in the short term, I mean in 3 to 4 years, there will be likely very few profits to pay out, as costs are likely to be driven up. I'm saying this because some countries are considering the CFDs to subsidize their industry and make it more competitive, but supposing we wanted to go there, I'm not saying we would, but assuming we wanted to, for the first 3 years it might work, but then there will be costs for the industry. And then what are we going to do? The industry is going to CFDs while it's profitable, but then when it's no longer profitable, the burden will fall on households. I believe it's a matter of cost and profit distribution among the different consumers, and it is uneven. And it's very difficult to explain this to households. When CFDs are profitable, you're excluded from the profits, but now that the time has come to foot the bill, that's when you come in. It's important for consumers to feel that there is a fair distribution of the costs and profits of the transition. Or else we risk losing the social support that we already have for the transition. But that social support may crumble down from one day to the next, and we should be very careful and not take it for granted. Mr. Basagoiti? Well, yes, I believe consumers need to feel protected, but we shouldn't interfere with markets to protect consumers. Market works on its own, and it must send the right pricing signals. And if prices are excessive for a segment of the population, we can provide subsidies and financial aid, but we shouldn't interfere with the market because we might be breaking more things than we fix. So I understand people think that CFDs are going to be a miracle because we're going to make a lot of money. And actually, no. If you sign a long-term CFD, you will calculate to offset your wins and your losses. So even if during the first few years you can have some surplus, well, nobody has a crystal ball to read the future, but when you're negotiating, you have to be aware that there will be losses or costs in the future, and you need to take that into account. And that's a way to prevent volatility and to ensure investments. I believe that CFDs are well designed for non-manageable energies like PV and wind. There is support to investment. Spain has a mechanism where profits and losses are bounced to consumers. I'm not saying it's the only mechanism, but so far it's working good. Consumers will have profit in positive times and losses when prices or costs go up. The thing is, perhaps I'm not so happy about the role CFDs have been given in the market reform, and that seems based on a conceptual error, because CFDs were created as a mechanism for states to foster the use of certain energies, and it's very good for wind and PV, but the mechanism to drive that production is a long-term contract, but it's settled as a CFD. And ultimately, it looks like governments are imposing CFDs. And there are other elements that are much required right now, like storage and flexibility. And maybe those would require some support from member states at some point, and certainly I don't believe that can be done under the form of CFDs. So using the word or the expression CFDs and applying that to the reform is overgeneralizing. There are mechanisms that can also be used, which are similar to CFDs, but not exactly CFDs.
We do support the reform. We are glad that it's rather narrow. It's not it's not comprehensive as it's said to be. That was going to be in the past by Madam President Ursula. But actually, there are some like pros and cons of the reform, and when it comes to to the customers, I think that protecting all customers in the situation where not every customer needs protection, it's like not the step into the right direction, because of course we need to protect vulnerable ones, that's for sure. But for example, we have over 1 million prosumers, and they don't have to be protected. Well, they have to be involved in the system even more. And actually, well, to me, this proposal to protect everyone is driven by the upcoming elections for the European Parliament, and unfortunately, this is the politicized part of the reform. Let's take care of the vulnerable ones, but also let's take care about the market, because we need to take care about the market, because the market and the companies are gonna deliver the capacity to the energy mix. We cannot anymore cut off our revenues. Otherwise, we won't be able to deliver in the future the supply to the market, and then we will have to take care about the customers, probably everyone, because everyone will be affected. When it comes to CFDs, PPAs, and capacity market, well, we do support all the strengthening the role, and yeah, so basically that's the summary of our position on that.
Señora Arnedillo.
Well, first of all, we need to clarify that when we talk about CFDs versus PPAs, we're actually talking about private initiatives, which are PPAs, versus the intervention of states, public intervention to foster investment in renewables through renewable auctions. That's what the Commission calls a CFD. And in that sense, it is important to realize that renewable energy auctions are not truly necessary as such, because renewables are already competitive without subsidies. So supporting or subsidizing something that doesn't need subsidizing can be interpreted as protectionism. Renewables also reduce CO2 emissions, but that is not entirely true, because in Europe we have the emission rights market. So the amount of emissions coming from participating industries are determined in the rights market, emission market. It has nothing to do with the renewables fostered by these auctions. And sometimes these auctions distort the PPA and long-term contract market, because as a generator sells their production in an auction, they no longer have any energy to offer to final consumers. So these auctions are making it harder for consumers to hedge against the risk of market price fluctuations. So ultimately, we're shrinking the market resilience by making it more sensitive to those ups and downs. As for the payout of those profits and this distribution of benefits, it's important to put ourselves in the shoes of a consumer that signed a contract. If the spot market goes down, they will have to pay for the difference between the difference in the spot market and the CFD. So if a consumer signed a fixed price contract, they will end up paying more. It's not a fixed price anymore, and it's volatile. And the lower the market price is, the more they will have to pay, which is precisely the opposite of the intention. And if a consumer wants to be exposed to prices in the spot market, they will not be able to do so, because the father state is charging them the cost of those contracts. And there is also the issue of using the profits from those renewable auctions to benefit vulnerable consumers, because it's equally possible that money will fall short. So what do? Pay vulnerable consumers for the cost of contracts that the state signed? It doesn't make any sense at all. If we want to protect consumers, let's protect the vulnerable ones, rather than subjecting them to fluctuations and to how well or how poorly the state does in buying those contracts. So the balance, striking a balanced proposal in renewable auctions versus letting the market work is very simple. We shouldn't rely on these auctions. And if there are signed contracts already, we can resell those in secondary auctions to final or to end consumers, so that those who want to hedge against spot market fluctuations can do so, and that brings back the liquidity that these auctions have removed from long-term markets. Any further contributions? You look like you would like to say something. Well, yes, Mr. Arnadello said a couple of things I do not agree with, but let me talk about one. Suppose we listen to Mr. Arnadello, we forget about CFDs, and place all our chips on PPAs. The first problem is that it's not getting us to decarbonization objectives. Look at the number of PPAs in Europe. Spain is the leading country, and still the number of PPA contracts is negligible. It will not get us there at the pace we need. That's obvious. And then there's a matter of redistribution. And that takes me back to my previous comment. Suppose we put all our eggs in the PPA basket. Suppose we, in the next 3 or 4 years, we do well, but after that, the price will be below the requirements of renewables to remain in the market. So no PPAs will be signed because no consumers will sign a PPA for 50 if they can buy for 30 in the market. And then Mr. Arnedello and others will beg for CFDs to be paid by household consumers or SMEs, which actually have no access to PPAs today. We're telling small consumers, now that PPAs are good, you don't get access to them. And CFDs will not be offered as a solution because they're very bad. But in 3 or 4 years, actually, you will be footing the bill for the party. And we need to be more balanced than that. We need a sensible distribution. Placing all our chips and PPAs now and CFDs later, burdening small consumers with them is the opposite of what we should be doing. Well, we will continue this debate over coffee in a while. Well, I feel eluded by your answer, and that's probably a sample of the problem at the ministry and the government. The government is hindering the development of PPAs because they're auctioning renewables, and they say, look, there are no PPAs, or PPAs are not flourishing. Although we're leaders in Europe with 35% of the total volume. Oh, PPAs are not progressing because we have renewable auctions. You cannot trip the PPAs market and then complain that they're not progressing and therefore you need to interfere more. It's a self-fulfilling intervention. The answer is not interfering more, but less. There's no foundation for that, saying that there are no further PPAs because there are renewable auctions is not sustained by data. Some countries have no auctions, or very few, and they have plenty of PPAs or not so many. I can't see a direct connection between the two. The reason PPAs are not prospering is not because we have renewable auctions, it's because there are other issues. And I think the Commission is making sense, detecting obstacles to the development of PPAs like backup and guarantees, for instance, but that direct link you're establishing sounds interesting as a theory, but it's not proven. But we agree. Can we move on, please? A generator signing a CFD has no possibility to sign a PPA later on because they no longer have the energy. Can we agree on that? That's a cause-effect relationship. Well, we agree that our generator can go into the market either through a CFD or a PPA. And if they decide to go through a CFD, they prefer that. And we would have to wonder why. Is it because it's more efficient? It's a bizarre discussion. But, can we agree to disagree because we have outstanding questions? Thank you very much. We will continue this discussion over coffee afterwards. Right now, I have a question for Mr. Basagoiti. Some have regretted the EU proposal and its lack of flexibility to capacity mechanisms, which are very difficult to enable, to implement. So how do you think the final reform should be enhanced? Well, to start from the beginning, let's talk about the term. I believe that stating or announcing that there should be more long-term market and that people should hedge themselves whenever they can is positive. But I don't like making these differences between PPAs and CFDs, but because there are so many contracts that are neither one nor the other. And at the same time, the Commission did forget about long-term regulated markets, which have been working for a long time, very positively, with more liquidity in some countries, not so much in other countries. But if they don't have more liquidity, it's for a reason. I don't know. Some countries are going through a complicated financial regulation, setting much burden on stakeholders. And I believe that if we're trying to simplify or manage the guarantees of long-term markets to make them more understandable, as long as it's not an ultimate cost for consumers, I agree. But we should think about long-term mechanisms or similar long-term mechanisms, because this complexity of becoming a financial agent just to pay your energy bill is absurd. Consumers have to become financial markets or financial experts, even if the aim is buying a fixed term energy for consumers that want to be price hedged. Another important aspect to me is flexibility. Certainly, the reform entails two things that we need to clearly differentiate: classic capacity mechanisms and flexibility mechanisms, which are sometimes called capacity as well. The classic capacity market, for me, can be necessary in several countries, even Spain, but for me it feels dated. It's older than the energy transition. It's about guaranteeing the supply. You need to guarantee the continuity of supply, and that market needs to be competitive enough. But the problem, our problem was not related to capacity supply. We don't lack capacity. The classic capacity market of guaranteeing supply had nothing to do with it. In Spain, we have not even come close to a lack of supply. The gas supply was there. So other mechanisms are needed. So these flexibility markets, well, you can call them capacity markets, but they're entirely different from the classic ones. In my opinion, we're all talking about driving PPAs to install renewables. That's fine. The point is that renewables right now are mostly wind and PV, and I'll focus on PV because it's easier to see. We all know that there are so many hours of production a day, and the time comes when prices during low times, well, market can only react to the production capacity by lowering price. And soon, well, maybe not so soon, but at some point in the future, we will have energy surplus during certain hours of the day, and that energy cannot be wasted. We cannot invest in having PV facilities or wind facilities and fail to manage the surplus so that those wind farms or those PV farms had to be shut down and stop producing. So demand needs to be displaced, and this is an interesting concept that the reform is probably forgetting: the flexibility of demand. How do we shift demand? If we have an energy surplus in the small hours of the morning, can we have demand during those times? How do we go about that? That's an important question we should address. Or how do we increase our storage capacity? And maybe Oscar and Albert will give me a hard time now, because I could say, let's leave the market alone, and since there is a price difference, the mechanisms to relocate demand will appear on their own. I'm not saying they won't, but that still opens two questions. Will that demand be strong enough? 2 years ago, with gas prices at 200, some solutions were required, but with the present prices, I don't know how this would happen. And second, at what pace, how quickly can we actually meet the pace that we need to reach 2030, 2040, and 2050? I don't have an answer for that, but we need to study it carefully. So I do see a possibility to create state-supported mechanisms to generate better demand-supply or flexibility mechanisms like storage. That sounds like a reasonable alternative. In my opinion, inevitable. Thank you very much. So please, just 1 minute per answer, and we will be kicked out of this room. So, Mr. Arnadillo, with these extraordinary measures, European Council have said that it shouldn't go beyond this month, but the Vice Chair said that they will study them before the end of the year to see if EC recommendations are accepted. I think I know what you might say, but what do you believe? Is there a maturity date for these emergency measures? Well, as you're saying, the European Council decided that extending those emergency measures generates more inconvenience than advantages. In Spain, the measures have reduced the liquidity of PPAs by more than 50% and the liquidity of the long-term market by over 50%, and they increased the gas consumption for energy generation by over 40%. We grew our CO2 emissions by more than 50%, and as I said, we gave away 2 billion euros to our neighboring countries, France, Portugal, and Morocco. This suggests that maybe those measures weren't needed to start with. We could say that extending these measures, even if prices are not exceeded, will not harm anyone, as they're not activated if the price is low, and if the price is high, it does make sense. But this distorts the incentives for consumers to sign long-term contracts, because if we if we cap market prices as the state, what's the point of the market? And when bad times come, the vulnerable groups will not be protected, and the government will feel tempted to interfere once more. So it's a chicken and egg problem. If you interfere, you distort the market, and when the market is distorted, you interfere. And it's important to break that vicious circle. And also, as the EC allows Spain to continue to apply these measures, it'll be very difficult for them to deny similar measures to other countries. So ultimately, that will be the beginning of the end for energy markets. Thank you very much for your quick reply. And here is the last question for you, Mr. Riera. It's a twofold question, but your answers can be very short. On Monday, we have a meeting for the European Council of Energy. What can we expect from it? And second, the Spanish presidency is around the corner, but we're also around the corner from elections. Can elections somehow endanger the European agenda and the outcome of discussions like this one? Well, about what to expect from the 19th Council meeting, well, I don't know. We all expect a general agreement to be reached on this subject, and the Swedish presidency are intensively working to achieve that. I hope they can. I don't know. I hope they can reach an agreement. And about the second question, the impact of presidential elections on the Spanish presidency, well, it's not your ideal political situation, I admit that. But certainly all teams in the State Secretariat for Energy and in the ministry are working hard and doing their best to move forward in these subjects during our presidency. So if there's a change in administration or not, we want to make as much progress as we can so that whoever takes office will find most of the work already done. Well, thank you very much. We have only 2 minutes for questions, if anyone in the audience has questions for our speakers. Any questions in this very short time? Any questions at all? Apparently not. So thus far, we keep the messages from our 4 speakers. Thank you very much for attending and giving us your useful perspective on this reform of the European electric market. We do hope the reform will advance and that the next time we meet, the text, the wording will be as final as it can be. This is the end of our Energy Forum. Thank you once once more to everyone who have made this event possible, the entire human team behind the event and our audience present here in the Cervantes Institute and online. Thank you very much and see you the next time.